Welcome back, guys. It's been so long since I have created or uploaded a tutorial and been busy with some work and stuff. So, back with some new tutorials, I learned a lot of stuff. And this tutorial is part of creating an e-commerce application for iOS, but part of it being that I need to create a Laravel API, REST API, which will have components where I can show product listing and everything along with authentication using Passport. So one of the things which is changed in recent Laravel is the implementation of Passport, so, which is coming along packaged with Laravel. So I thought it's a good way to start a tutorial where I can show you how to actually create a Laravel based REST API which has Passport OAuth2 authentication implementation. So I'm not going to actually introduce what OAuth2 Passport is all about because there are lots of tutorials or even documentation available for that. So we'll just directly go with the implementation of how to do it. So let's get started. So let's start with creating a fresh Laravel project. For that, you need to just run this Laravel new command. If you already installed Laravel, you need composer, components, and everything. If you want to refer how it is being done, you need to refer back to one of my earlier tutorials where I'm creating a Laravel application using Dingo. So the approach is more or less the same. So you'll have to just create or include composer components, install Laravel, and then you can directly call Laravel new to create a Laravel project. So you just need to call Laravel new, and I'm gonna call my project as Let's Shop. Is my application, so I'm creating an API for that. Before that, let me just point it to the right. I'm having an API folder. Let me create it inside that. So new, I'm calling it Let's Shop API. Let's Shop is going to be the application which I'm creating for iOS, and which is again coming up as a big tutorial. So this is the first step of creating that tutorial where I'm creating this Laravel API. So once you do that, we'll start installing Laravel for you. Fresh installation, and that's it. You are done with creating a Laravel project. I'll go inside API, and you have the Let's Shop API already created. So some configurations right now I'm gonna do where, let me open it up. Open the project, Laravel API, Let's Shop API. Go inside, and I have the environment file where I need to point it to the right database. Mine is a local one where I'm just calling it as Let's Shop underscore staging, which is created locally. So I'm just pointing to that one here, which is, this is my local host. Port will be, for me it is 8889. My database is called let's shop underscore staging. Let me just double check that. Let's shop underscore staging, and password and username is root. So I have set up this one right now, so I don't have anything in the database as yet. Once we do a migration, you'll get to see all the tables which are created as part of Passport. Let's go back, and this is my app. Let me just start with doing some settings. So I need to first do a install of Passport, composer install, or composer require Laravel Passport. That's the first step, using which it'll install Passport components to my application. So this was earlier available through a third-party vendor. So now it is being integrated directly I don't remember the vendor name. It was some league of something. So that's what it is being directly being integrated into Laravel. So now my passport is installed into the project. Next step is to actually configure it within the app.php within the config file. So all I need to do is to go to the provider section and then just include the specific line there. Laravel passport service provider. This is what right now we included using the composer. So this is already integrated now. The next step is to run the migration, which will create the required tables for you. So PHP artisan migrate. So it has migrated some tables. On refresh of this database, you can see that it has created auth related tables as well as the users table. So that's all created now. So it has all the fields required. Let me just go back to the project. The migration is done for passport, and now I have included the passport components, but I need to install it so that the specific client secrets are created. For that, I just need to create it using PHP artisan passport install command. Sorry. So it has created a couple of things here. Personal access client. Whatever I'm interested in is the passport grand client created. So this is being created on the database side. If you see, go to the database and you have these personal access client and the passport grand client. Both of them being created right now. So still we don't have a user to test it. So we are done with installing the passport related stuff. Let me just check some of the things, and we still need to integrate some of the things in the project, which is like introducing something very specific to passport. For that, go to the user model, which is available in your app side, all the models. Go to the user model, and you need to include something called as API tokens. This is very specific to passport. So once you include it, an import will also be included. Laravel passport has API tokens, so this is required. So I have introduced here. This will enable you to have some features of auth which you can directly use. So this is the dependency which you need to add, has API tokens. So that being done, let's go further and introduce something called as in the auth service provider. Go to auth service provider. You need to uncomment this part in the policies, model policy, and also include something very specific to passport. All the routes related to the passports you need to include here. And passport routes, still asking for an import to that. So this is my Laravel passport route. So that is also added right now to the boot section of this. So you need to uncomment this and include this. So we are not done yet. We still have some more configurations to be done. Still continue with that. So let's now, the final thing, I guess this is where the final thing need to happen is in the auth.php config section. You have currently the default API driver being token based. We need to change it to passport. That's the next step which we need to do, where we are changing this API driver from token to passport. So as far as configurations for passports are concerned, we are all good right now. So let's start with defining our routes. So for that, let's go to api.php, which is within the routes folder. You have the api.php. there, whatever you already have, let's remove that, and then start with creating a register function, which will be the route. So for that, registering in the sense you need to register a user that you are trying to create. For that, you need to have a route for that. So before even creating that, uh, let's create a controller. We don't have any specific controller created for our cause, so let's create something called as PHP artisan make a controller called, let's call it user controller. So that generates a user controller. You can see that getting created here, and let's define a function there called register, which will accept a request. So that's my request object, and I can then create a validator. So we need to check all the fields through this validator. So call the make function of the validator, accept all the request objects, request all, and then add the validation specific to the fields. Let's say we need to pass, for registration we need to pass a name field, email, password, and maybe a confirm password. Normally it will be handled in the client side, but let's include it as well here. So for that, let's start with the name field, which is nothing but a required field. No other conditions, it's just a required field. And then you have the email, which is more like you need to validate whether it is anyway a required field, and you should also validate that it's an email field. Then you have the password field. You can add any kind of validations that you need on the server side. Let's say if you need to truncate the length which is being received from the client side. Normally those are very specific client validations, but still if you want to include it, let's say on the API side, those can be included, but then it's up to the design that you are looking for. So this is more like a required field. I'll also have one more field called confirm password, which will accept a required, which is again a required, and also you need to say that it is the same as the password field. Okay, so that being done, let's validate it. If like the validator fails, then we can directly send an error code as a response. So we can return response with JSON. We'll call this, because this being a bad request, we can just directly say it's a 400 bad request, and the response we can say error, and maybe capture the validator's errors. So that being done, we are pretty good there. Validation error, failure, will return directly there itself. And if it is successful, let's move forward and then include input fields, which is nothing but all the request fields, all the fields of request. Also, one thing which we need to do is to transform the password field into an encrypted one. So you might have to just say bcrypt. That's one function, utility function available along with Laravel to encrypt your password. So that's being done right now. We're just accepting the input fields and then converting and reassigning it back to the password field after applying an encryption. That's all we are doing right now here. And that being done, Let's now create the user. So user will accept user as a create function, which will accept the input. So the input has email, password, name, email, password. The user object is created. You need to input the user app user. That's being imported now, and user is created. So once user is created, we can respond back saying that creation was successful, and also we can also return the token which is being created. So let's say success. If we have a token created as part of the user, that is the user create token is a function available. You can just say which is the app. Mine is let's shop API is my app, and pass the access token back. So that's my user create token, and set the token which is created for this user. That's done. Now I have the success. I may also capture the name of the user just to see who the user is. It can be even email, anything. Let's even do an email here. So $user has the email. So that being done, now we can return the response. So in the response, we can say success, and then pass back the success response with the token of the status code of 200. So that's all we need to do as steps. Validator, import that. This is the facade we can use, I guess. Validator. So validator is first checking for the name, email, password, all these conditions, and then once if the validation is failing, we are responding back with an error. If it's a bad request, we still send it back, and if it's valid, then we are accepting everything, converting the username, the password to an encrypted format, resetting it back, and then creating the user used based on that. Once that is done, we can get the token of that user, access token, and return it back. So that's all we are doing here as part of the register. Now let's create within the API.php, let's create a route. For that route, route dot, let me make it a post request, and let's call this route as register and point it to user controllers register function. So that's all we need to do. And we need to import this. I guess that will do. Route.post request register is done. Let's try creating the first user. So I already have run some tests here. So this is my, right now if you go to the database, you will not see any users. Let's create that. Name, email, password, and confirm password. So let's also check some validations. If I'm passing a different confirm password, will it give me a register? So before that, let me just run the server. PHP artisan serve. It's running in this 8000, localhost 8000. Come back, localhost API register. All look fine. Let's run it. So you can see that the password validation is not matching, so it's giving me an error. So I'm just making it the same. Now it should execute, and it's successfully done. I'm just getting that response call back, and the same email ID for this token for this specific user. So I'm receiving that. So that being done, let's go back to code, create one more login function. So we'll just wind up after this, because the these are the couple of things which are required to create or authenticate a user based on this token approach. So maybe the next tutorial I will show you how to actually limit or restrict users, some specific users. Let's say if I'm a store owner, I should only see all the products which are related to my store. So that kind of a restriction has to be applied based on this authentication. So that's not a scope of this particular tutorial, but we will look into it in the next one. But right now I'm just showing you how to create passport related implementation using Laravel, using the passport feature which is already integrated into their framework. So let's create a public function again for login that accepts nothing, and function login, and then all that we need to do is we need to authenticate the user. So let's authenticate. So that's authentication attempt. If that succeeds, we'll go inside this if condition. So for authentication, all we need to check is email. What is the email? So you have the request object, just email, and the password. Request of password. So these two are the parameters which we are accepting from the client for validation. So once these two parameters are checked and if authentication is successful, we import this one. So this has imported support for SAD auth. So my condition, if authentication is successful, then I can actually get the user from the auth object. So auth the user, which is authenticated and which is successful right now. So the attempt is successful, you can get the authenticated user based on that. And then in the success object, I can get the token related to that user. So get the token, similar thing which we did in the last case, where if you have the user, then create the token for that. So this is created for this specific, maybe you can call it the session. So once you're logging in, you get this token. You can even set the expiry to it, but then I'm not looking into that yet in this tutorial. I'm just creating I'm just trying to do the authentication and then just returning those tokens which are created for this user. So let's call it the shop API access token. So I have the access token. If the user is authenticated, then I get the authenticated user, and using that authenticated user, I create a token and then provide this access token. So these functions are coming from whatever we had introduced in this, using this has API tokens. So let's go back to user controller. So on success, I return this, and once the login is successful, I can return this response JSON, call it will be 200, and create the JSON, let's pass the success, which which is nothing but having this token. So once the user is logged in, validated, we just return the success. And if the user is not valid, then obviously we can just say return the response. Calling it error and then saying that user is not valid, 401 unauthorized user. You can just call the error and say it is the user is unauthorized. So that's pretty much what you can do. So we also have this response. Okay, that's pretty much okay. So now let's try using, we already have this route now. We'll go back to Postman. I have a login function which is of post, which is accepting two parameters. I created the user with superadmin at letsgoeasy.com. That's my user, and password is here it's secret. Let me just start with a wrong password. It should say an unauthorized user. So that's pretty much it. Run it. Unauthorized, that we are getting that same error. Now let's do the right password, give the right password and send it. It should return the token. So that's pretty much what we did with this tutorial, where we are creating the tokens based on passport approach using Laravel. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial and it was informative. I'm coming back with more tutorials very specific to a product that I'm building for tutorial sake, an e-commerce application for iOS. So the backend is completely being driven by this Laravel API, which has these features of passport and everything. So that's what I'm coming up with. This is the beginning of the big thing which is coming up. So stay tuned and subscribe. Watch for more episodes coming soon. Until then, bye.